Good day, ladies and gentlemen. Welcome back to the second installment of the Trad Roundtable. And this month, it's going to be hosted on my channel, Mere Tradition. So thank you for joining us. I've got esteemed guests with me, as you can see here, a whole panoply of them, and I'm very excited, including, we used to call Eric Sammons the dad of Catholic Twitter. Soon he will be the granddad of Catholic Twitter, which means dad for Catholic Twitter is up for debate. So we're going to have someone in the running for that. And so I'm very excited to have all my friends here today. We're going to be speaking about the notion of liberalism and U.S. politics specifically. But this applies to all political milieus, obviously myself being in Canada, a different constitution and so forth, but these same errors are still part of this sort of post-Christendom Enlightenment context, which has kind of become the de facto thing for many different Western countries. So these do apply to other countries. So we're not picking on the U.S., necessarily. Maybe we are, but that's okay. These guys, being Americans, it's like you can drop the epithet because you have the right to. You can pick on your own country, and we're doing it in response to a couple things. Recently, of course, there was the Republican National Convention. We're going to show some clips from there in a second. There was yes, Catholic prayers. There was a Catholic bishop, was great, but there were also Protestants praying, and there was, of course, the Sikh incantation or whatever you want to call it, along with other things that were strange. And recently, J.D. Vance, the vice presidential candidate, himself a baptized Catholic. And I may say this for my fellow trads, give him time and give him prayers. He's a new Catholic, so let's hope for the best for him. But he, of course, was soft on the abortion pill stance, which was something that seemed like a shot in the face for good Catholics, of course. And then, of course, the Republican campaign platform sort of took out the strong stance against abortion and traditional social conservative values, which was a long-standing tradition of the GOP, which obviously upset some people. And this has people saying to themselves, hold on a sec, I'm a Catholic. I've been supporting this platform. I've been supporting this party for a long time. Yeah, they're not perfect, but they were good on the fundamentals and the things that were non-negotiables. What am I going to do now? So I decided to make Eric Sammons' life extremely difficult. And I wrote an article for Crisis talking about how, yes, those things are evils. Abortion is an evil, but there's a greater evil that has been sort of overlooked by the pro-life movement. And this is the error of religious indifferentism, which is, as we'll see from something I'll bring up at some point, not necessarily a positive heresy in the strict sense, but Gary Goulagrange and others, and the popes, of course, talked about it as being at least a positive error, which is still a danger to the faith and danger to your soul. That all religions are equal in the positive sense, which is an assault on God, because it's an equation of God with the devil and false deities and man-made religions, which is impossible. And the logic is that it's a greater sin than an attack on neighbor, because it is an attack on the soul and God Almighty, which is worse than any type of homicide, which would include abortion, which is a hard thing to hear, but it is a theological statement that has validity nonetheless. So before I open it up to the floor, I do want to mention Tim is running 1 Peter 5, of course, as the editor of 1 Peter 5. And right now, 1 Peter 5 is actually having a fundraiser, which is going quite well. We want to keep it going. I'm going to show you on the screen here. It's the summer campaign, and you can see the goal is $40,000. All of that goes to Eric Sammons' pension fund. And we want your help to get to the summit of this goal. So those watching, throw a few shekels this way. 1 Peter 5 is funded by you, the reader. And this is very important to make sure there's a strong Catholic discourse, traditional Catholic discourse. You can go there, make one-time donations, monthly, whatever you want. You can do $1 if you want. Don't buy so many green tea lattes with soy milk for a lot of reasons, but you can, stop those for a couple days and give a few shekels over to 1 Peter 5. So check out the link in the description area for that. And before we get into the open floor, is there anything that anybody would like to say before I bring up some clips? All right. Silence is golden. Okay.
We're not going to give all the money to Eric Sammons' pension fund, just so you know. So
Eric's going to invest it.
Just trying to be transparent.
He's going to invest it in Bitcoin. That's what he's going to do.
Yeah, that's true. He doesn't need any money because he's rich off Bitcoin. All right, that's all.
What is this, pick on Eric Day? Come on, guys.
Yes, it is. Yes, it is. Okay. All right. So I'm going to play a couple clips here, guys. And the first one, this is, Matt sent me this clip. This is of a Bishop Listecki praying through Jesus Christ our Lord at the GOP convention. and we'll just see his prayer for a sec, and then I'm going to play something else from JD Vance, and then we'll get into the conversation. So I'm going to just pull this up here on the screen, and I believe the sound should be coming through. Give me a thumbs up if you hear it, and a thumbs down if not.
Lord, we nation. Sudden that all are equal, right, including life, liberty. Washington, keep holy protection and citizens to a affection. Our Lord. Amen.
Dear Waheguru, true God, we thank you for creating America according. We seek your country. Nanak Naam Chardni Kala Tere Bane Sa. May your name forever be in good that every.
All right, it was choppy on my end, but did you guys hear it properly?
Choppy on my end also.
Oh, man. Well, I'm sorry about that. Well, I don't know what it is, but ladies and gentlemen, I apologize for that. I don't know, internet problems. But you get the gist. Catholic bishop doing Catholic prayers, non-Catholic doing pagan, false deity prayers. So before we get to the JD Vance clip on abortion, who wants to jump in here? What does this tell us about the sort of post-Christian Enlightenment era political order? What is the main problem here in your guys' opinion?
I think it's a perfect example that it's an illusion to think that a nation can be truly Christian and religiously pluralistic at the same time. It's not possible. That's why St. Pius X and other popes condemned the separation of church and state, because in order for a state to be truly Christian, there has to be cooperation between the secular power and the ecclesiastical power.
Yeah, and this is obvious for reasons that I could go into, but somebody else wants to jump in.
Well, I think it shows the power of Christianity that we have just remnants, and it's like just the. Sorry, I was just going to say it shows the power of Christianity in that America is like the remnants of Christendom, and it was able to kind of go on for a long time with those remnants staying relatively Christian. Like you didn't have pagan prayers at political conventions, stuff like that. But eventually it's going to die out because it's not the fullness of Christianity. It's just these remnants that kind of have remained. And now we're seeing just what Matt was saying. It's kind of, seeing the result of this religious pluralism, which is baked in here. Now we have just the fact that we literally have public worship of a pagan god with a bunch of Christians there. That's the crazy thing, is there's lots of Christians at the Republican National Convention. I think half of them were probably bowing their heads for it and everything.
That's the sick part of it right there, is that they're Christians, now modern Christians, even especially modern Catholics since the council, think that it's virtuous to be respectful of false religions that worship the devil. It's outrageous.
Murray?
Yeah, I think there's obviously at play right now. There's sort of two factions going against each other. There's the sort of cult of liberty, tolerance as a virtue faction, and then there's the sort of eternal revolution. There's the Marxism that wants to impose their new view of morality. But I wanted to give a quote, because I think, in my view, what we saw at the Republican National Convention, it even went against the original American spirit of the founders. And I want to read, this is from the Federalist #2, John Jay. He says, With equal pleasure, as often I've taken notice that Providence has been pleased to give this one connected country to one united people, a people descended from the same ancestors, speaking the same language, professing the same religion, attached to the same principles of government, very similar in their manners and customs, and who, by their joint counsel, arms, and efforts, fighting side by side through a long and bloody war. Now, I think, of course, there's work to be done there. We, of course, Catholicism needs to be the state religion. Jesus Christ needs to be recognized. His church needs to be recognized. But I think there used to be something at least slightly redeemable, and that this country used to be a Christian country. I firmly believe that. And what the Republican National Convention essentially did was abandon even that, even the vestiges of Christendom, as Eric just mentioned, that were left there, the RNC has effectively abandoned.
Yeah. If I might add something as an outsider, yes, there are problems in the Constitution in the sense that it's obviously animated by sort of the Protestant and deist spirit. But this is why I'm always softer on the American experiment than I am on the French Revolution. I don't think they're the same. For one, the French Revolution is after and was more radical. But because it is true in this notion of having this sort of country for the population's beliefs and values, it has to be admitted that that would have been understood in the context of a Christian country in the Protestant sense. But the point I made in my article was everyone was freaking out about this pagan, which is bad. But if we understand the way our fathers and theologians and canonists and so forth have talked in the past, there's a greater culpability on the heretic in many ways. Because it's an explicit rejection of the Church of Christ in the sense of knowing that they're rejecting the church, like with Martin Luther. And there was a Lutheran pastor. And, the prayers of Lutherans, this is a heretical sect that is odious to God because it is at the heart of the murder of Christendom. It's, Martin Luther was a mutilator of the body of Christ in the civil sense. And he was a great criminal in the history of the church. And it's interesting to see the reactions to, whoa, what's a pagan doing here? And I'm thinking to myself, whoa, what are a bunch of heretics doing here? And again, I understand the GOP isn't a Catholic party, but I'm just going from what I'm noticing from Catholics saying, now this is too far. And I'm thinking, well, I think if that was the line, it would have been too far before. Perhaps somebody else wants to jump in.
Yeah, if I could, I was thinking, whenever I saw the onslaught of responses against the GOP from Catholics, particularly online, I kind of chuckled at myself and reminded myself of our Lord's discussion in Matthew chapter 7 of, why are you pointing out the speck in your brother's eye when you have the log in your own? I was laughing to myself because I was saying, for 6 decades now, we've had the popes openly pray with members of false religions. We, of course, have seen the massive amount of astroturfing online of trying to defend those actions. But then, when a secular party in a secular nation is trying to expand its political base, then the Catholics freak out. It's quite funny because, we're looking at a secular party and saying, oh, how dare you have this speck in your eye whenever, you're Canadian, Kennedy. Pope Francis came to Canada, placing his hand on his heart during the Circle of Spirits prayer. Who are we to judge, if you will, if to use a line? I would say that we have to take this whole situation in its historical context, which is, again, a secular party trying to expand its own base in a critical election season. And they're doing so for pragmatic reasons. Now, I agree with all of you guys on all of your takes in the sense that on an objective level, it's wrong. And I'll piggyback on what you said, Kennedy. When it comes to, like, for instance, heretical sects, if we were all being consistent in our ecclesiology, we would look at the teaching of Pope Pius XII in his discussion to Irish pilgrims, where he's emphatic that the only true Christian has to be Roman, i.e. Catholic. And so therefore, I think that if we're going to criticize the GOP, we also have to do a massive internal inspection and say, okay, well, this is a secular party in a secular country. We're a worldwide institution. We're the very body of Christ. and yet we can't even figure it out and get it right at the moment. And so maybe we should prioritize our discussion, on that. I'm saying our discussion as a church, if you will, on that issue, than what the GOP is doing. Because the GOP, you can look at the history of the GOP, it's changed its positions throughout time. It used to be more pro-abortion than it even is now. And then, of course, during the 80s and 90s, it became very pro-life. And so it's been inconsistent throughout time, as every political party has. But we got to get our act together, I think. That's my 2 cents.
Aaron, I'm interested in your take, as you're the catechism czar. What is the consensus in your research about essentially, what has always been understood about praying with non-Catholics for Catholics to do in a public sense?
Yes, it's always consistently condemned. The real challenge that we have, I think, as Nicholas was pointing out, is that the American experiment historically is still being viewed as such. I mean, what's really happened, especially since Baltimore just came out, so our edition, volume 16, the Trad Roundtable series, we did the new editions of the Baltimore. That was an instance where, in the church's kind of historical context meeting, the textual record being developed is looking at America as this grand experiment, but really a danger zone. I mean, it's why you have even the first syllabus with Pius IX, which really could be a caption to the video you just played, Kennedy, talking about, in the present day, it's no longer expedient. The Catholic religion should be held as the only religion of the state, to the exclusion of all other forms of worship. It's been thus wisely decided by law in some Catholic countries that persons coming to reside therein shall enjoy public exercise of their own unique or peculiar forms of worship. These are all propositions condemned right in the throes of the American bishopric, essentially trying to find what position to strike. So here we are. American bishops have please don't destroy us. American civil powers will fly the pluralist flag as a means to do that. But it's right in the midst of this broader question, like we've said, of how will the church engage when she no longer has standing armies, when there are rapidly shrinking at that time, these catechisms coming out, and now next to non-existent, the Papal States. So her physical territories are now extremely constricted, and then also scattered. They're what could be viewed as independent city-states. Not really been viewed that way. Timothy, you talking?
I'd like to get y'all's take on talking practically speaking. How are we to actually politically engage for the sake of Jesus as king in our context? And what I might ask about, is there a distinction between true and false ecumenism? Here's what I mean by that. The popes and bishops supported what I would call a true ecumenism before the council in the form of the Legion of Decency in both America and Germany, which was a Catholic-led group against Hollywood pornography, which welcomed both Protestants and Jews who joined as a Catholic-led movement. So the Catholics were praying the prayers at the event, and the Protestants and Jews who wanted also that goal of anti-pornography. And this reminds me of when I went to my March for Life in Michigan. It was clearly it was what I would also call a true ecumenism, because the bishop of the capital started the whole event with a prayer. It was a Catholic prayer. It wasn't like a wishy-washy prayer. He made the sign of the cross. He did the Catholic stuff. He prayed a Catholic prayer to begin the event. And then they had some speakers who were not Catholic. So they were just basic pro-life message. So that's my question. How do we practically work this out on a practical level? Is there such a thing as a true ecumenism in that sense?
I think a historical parallel.
If I might. Sorry,
go on, Nick.
Oh, okay. My thoughts there's a lot of practical things that I've engaged in my own activities. So I don't know how familiar some of you guys are, your audience, Kennedy, but one of the things that I do on my channel is I do a lot of active protesting against wicked things that go on in the public sphere, whether that's, transgender events going on, pride parades, etc. And I have found that, again, most of the people who come out and protest with me are fellow Catholics. But there's also a fair amount of Protestants that will show up in some form or fashion. I'm not talking about, the tin horn, hellfire, and brimstone preachers. I'm just talking about like concerned citizens of America who do not like seeing degeneracy going on. And I think that we can work with them in the public sphere because on the one hand, we're not, if we're careful, we're not communicating in things that are objectively sacred. So going into communicatio in sacris, we're just trying to say get laws changed and get bad things out of the public sphere. That's okay. I think you can work with anybody on that. I also think you have to apply our Lord's words of Matthew 10. So as an example, I'm at the moment starting to work with the Texas State Senate and kind of an internship and kind of getting into actual serious state politics. And some of the discussions that Gen Z conservatives are having, I think Murray can probably attest to this, is that we are very interested in having social change on social issues, talking seriously about abortion restrictions and pornography restrictions and things that, in the 80s, the neocons gave lip service to, but didn't actually do anything about. But we have to be, as our Lord says, wise as serpents and gentle as doves. And what do I mean by this? We have to go into the public sphere and recognize, because we're in a secular society, that we can challenge certain errors in society. For instance, we were talking recently in the Texas State Senate on the discussion of pornography. We can't go in there and say, we have to ban pornography because the Bible says lust is a sin. That's not going to happen, right? And the vast majority of the public's not going to accept that. But what we can do is go in with our biblical convictions and also point out, hey, this is a physical health epidemic because it has the same neurological effects upon the brain, upon the prefrontal cortex, as, say, methamphetamines, as heroin, etc. This is a good argument to use for gradual limitations of let's actually start cracking down on this and making it harder and harder to achieve. So in the public sphere, when it comes to certain things like that, I 1000% think, to answer your question, Tim, that there can be a practical ecumenism. But in the religious context of let's all kind of hold hands and say we all pray to the one God and et cetera, that would, I believe, be a betrayal of the deposit of faith, because the deposit of faith is clear that the one spouse of Jesus Christ is the Roman Catholic Church and no other, and we can't betray that. On the natural level, though, 1000% I think we can work together when it comes to just achieving certain political goals.
And that is reflected in the traditional catechisms.
Yeah. That's Aaron, you said that's reflected in the traditional catechisms?
Yes. I mean, you think of even in these Catholic nations, right? You have the practice of civil toleration. So there are, even in, again, Catholic nations, there is this force that exists for, whether it's in the pressure groups. I mean, think of the Crusades, right? You have any number of Catholic nation states that even enact treaties. I mean, unilateral and multinational treaties with the heathen. I mean, they're in common cause. And so these kind of things aren't fundamentally opposed in the public sphere of action. It's really the communicatio in sacris is the hard line, that's participating in something that is itself viewed as intrinsically evil. And the other one is policies that themselves are destructive of the church. And this, to my mind, is where we're in the strangest kind of position historically, is not only in this country, the good old U.S. of A., but everywhere. I mean, you have the rise of these secular states following the revolution, and this becomes, I mean, England is maybe the best example, where you have an ostensibly Christian schismatic sect that is birthed, on this island that's been Catholic for 1,000 years, And most of the confessors and martyrs that are of the English, Elizabethan era aren't ever recognized as such, because it becomes so hard to parse the cases of authentic martyrdom from civil actors that don't have this perfection and charity. So most of them suffer on the grounds of undermining the state. They're enemies of the state, and that's, of course, the language we're always going to see. In any of these now secular states, is that this isn't a religious issue. You Catholics doing Catholic things over there, you're seditious, and that, to my mind, is our big challenge.
Eric, you've been involved in the pro-life movement for a long time. What has been your experience? Mine has been March for Life in Ottawa here. Definitely a huge Catholic presence. And again, it's a march. So, like, for example, the SSPX boarding school here, clearly not going to be engaging in any liberalism, sends a bus of students up every year, and they do a rosary with Lady of Fatima statue, and they're just there. They're just praying for an end to abortion, and like, it's awesome, and people tag along and they love it, and singing the rosary and all that kind of stuff. But then there also is, to be equal to all the different types of pastors and stuff. The organizer, who is a Catholic, will bring up the different pastors and ministers to say prayers, and bring up a Catholic priest to say a prayer, and then have speeches from different ones. So like, it's kind of this double-edged sword where it's totally an event filled with Catholics and Catholic piety, which is great, and really a civil thing, which is totally fine to mix for civil things. But then they do bring in this very problematic, like, now we're basically being led in prayer by a heretic. So has your experience been something like that, or what has it been like over the years?
Well, it's interesting because I joined the pro-life movement as a Protestant. So this was early 90s when the evangelicals were really kind of leading the charge. If you know the history of pro-life movement in America, in the 70s and early 80s, it was Catholics, Joan Andrews Bell, people like that, who really were the core. And then the evangelicals like Randall Terry, who's now Catholic, but Randall Terry, people like that, took over in the 80s. And that's when I joined. And it was an interesting thing because, first of all, I became Catholic through the pro-life movements. So I have a hard time, criticizing it because it gave me, entry into the church in a sense. But what I found is like the Catholics, there were two different types of Catholics in the pro-life movement. There was the type of Catholics who were always consistently, I believe the Catholic Church is the one true faith, while they were engaged with Protestants or whoever in pro-life movement. And often as a Protestant, those people annoyed me. Those Catholics annoyed me, but I came to their side. They're the ones who converted me. And then there were the Catholics who were just like, they're very squishy. They never wanted to say anything authentically Catholic. They might not even want to pray a rosary in front of Protestants because it might offend them, things like that. They definitely wouldn't say anything against contraception because that might make the Protestants go away or offend them. And so I really found that it was a mix. And I ended up gravitating towards the hardcore Catholics as a Protestant because I was like, these guys, they know what they believe. They believe it strongly. I don't even agree with them on like contraception at the time and things like that. But like, these guys are hardcore and I respect that. And eventually, of course, I went over to their side. So I do think it's just within the pro-life movement, there's lots of different people, but there always have been that core group of Catholics who have been like, we're doing this because we're Catholic. We welcome anybody who wants to join us in doing this, but we're kind of doing it our way. We're doing it the Catholic way. If you want to join us, great. If you want to do your own thing, you can do your own thing elsewhere. But this is what we're going to do. So I think that's really, the model as Catholics we should have is like, okay, we're going to do this the Catholic way. We're going to remain always Catholic against contraception. We're going to pray the rosary in front of your face if we have to. But, you can join us. You can be with us in doing that.
I want to bring up a historical example here of why, this again, I'm looking at the comments and it's mixed, obviously. And, but I want to bring up just how serious the church has been about this in the past. Because there was this organization in France called Action Française, led by Charles Maurras, who was, he was Catholic by baptism. He was a Frenchman, but he was not a Catholic in the practicing sense as an adult. But he was very anti-liberal. He was very much in the vein of what we might consider a type of integralism. He wanted to reestablish the French monarchy, and he was of the mind that he wanted to establish Catholicism as the religion of France. So Many Catholics were part of it. It was basically a Catholic movement. And Father Le Floch at the French seminary, who taught Archbishop Lefebvre, would basically use his writings and things like that, and the writings of the people, supporters of Action Française, to show the true doctrine of the social kingship of Christ, because a lot of it was really strong. Eventually, there's a sort of conspiracy behind this, as there is with all 20th century church politics, well, every century church politics. And essentially, the Action Française it's not condemned per se in the sense that it wasn't a Catholic organization to begin with, but Catholics were basically forbidden to participate in it. And the reason was very interesting, because you think of the Action Française now and you think, my goodness, that sounds like a dream. That's an organization looking to establish a Catholic monarchy in my country. Like, where do I sign up? But the reason was because even though it was so good, there was this danger of liberal error in it, because Charles Maurras, he believed that Catholicism was the religion of France because it was the religion of the French people, not because it was the true religion that ought to be the religion of every nation. Now, this was seen as a political blunder by Pius XI, and he seems to have been pressured to do so by liberals who wanted to use it as a Trojan horse to stop the only real stopgap against liberalism in France, and then Pius XII overturned it. But the reason I bring this up is because this is something in relatively recent history where this just shows how seriously the minds of the popes have been on liberalism, that even when a movement is basically 99% good, if there's a little bit of strychnine in the ointment, they're worried that it's going to be poisonous. But at the same time, we see Pius XII overturning it. It was too late. France had basically been lost to the communists at that point. Nonetheless, Pius XII's reasoning was essentially, well, yeah, Pius XI had a point here, but in the practical sense, this is really the only movement that could protect the rights of Catholics. So there is an element that, if I could vote for Donald Trump, I'd vote for him as hard as possible, because at this point in history, when we're looking at, hey, the communists want to shoot you in the head, literally, they want to shoot you. There's a guy that they hate for some reason, and he's the only guy who can stand the sight of you. So perhaps we can talk about how, yes, there are problems, but at the same time, no one here is saying that, because there's liberalism in the GOP, therefore you can't support it. If that's the case, you can't even say can't involve yourself in politics at all in the United States. So perhaps one of you want to talk about the sort of practical aspect of, there's problems, but as Catholics, we're still it's totally permissible for us to participate in these in this public sphere for reasons that have nothing to do with religious indifference.
Yeah,
if I can add something there,
I think that
it's
sure. Let's let Murray go here, Nick.
Yeah, go for it.
I think there's something a bit more fundamental that's being attacked nowadays, where we didn't have in the early 20th century, late 19th century, which is that our identity itself is at risk of being extinct, and this has been a long, over a century's plan in order to do this. But fundamentally, we cannot have Christ the King being king over a nation if we don't have a nation itself. And our nation at this point has lost any sort of national identity. We've lost any sort of common customs with one another. We've lost the sense of having one united people. Immigrants no longer assimilate into our country. Or at least not expected to. We're promoting multiculturalism. As I mentioned before, the idea of America being even a Christian country is now largely extinct, and we see the country is being dominated by foreign influence. And so I think it's almost necessary in order to cooperate with our fellow Americans, who we of course disagree with on fundamental principles. We need to cooperate with them, though, in order to restore our national identity. I think our movement needs to be explicitly Catholic. We cannot compromise on that. Our end goal and our final end needs to be kept in mind, which is we want Jesus Christ the king over civil society, but we need to preserve our society. We need to preserve our nation. And at the moment, the threat of foreign influence and foreign powers dominating our country, it's at risk of destroying that. And so I think it is necessary to cooperate with various groups that may not be traditional Catholics in order to stop this foreign influence dominating our country.
Matt, you haven't heard from you in a while. What are your thoughts?
Well, I guess when it comes to voting, my view is that we need to use our vote as Catholics to restrain the most amount of evil, if that's the best we can do. In regard to Trump, I think just like with other politicians, like with J.D. Vance, I think we're still going to talk about him. We certainly need to pray for them, pray for their conversion. We need to pray for Donald Trump that he will embrace the Catholic faith, especially after he was clearly God intervened to save him on the anniversary of Our Lady of Fatima's third apparition. I loved what Eric posted about that. Apparently real close to the fairgrounds, wasn't it, Eric, where there's a church dedicated to Our Lady of Fatima and a little shrine. Do I remember that correctly?
I think the church was something else, but it was the shrine. There's a shrine to Our Lady of Fatima that was like basically within spitting distance of the fairgrounds.
Right. So we have a really good article at Catholic Family News by Stephen Cox, who works for LifeSite. It's called The Enigma of Trump and Election 2024. I highly recommend people going to CatholicFamilyNews.com and checking out that article. It's a very balanced take on, or balanced look and analysis of a lot of different issues, where Trump stands, the good, the bad, and other. But yeah, I mean, I would certainly be, in theory, I would be in favor of establishing what our friend Dr. Taylor Marshall has talked about, a Christ the King party platform, whatever. But practically speaking, it would be so difficult to get actual candidates, even at the state level, elected, because we're kind of locked in to this two-party system, or the uniparty, as it's sometimes called. So I wish that there were more viable political parties in this country than just the two. And I'm not exactly sure how to get that done. That would take a lot of work and a lot of time. Well,
I can tell you, as someone from a country with multiple parties, sometimes it honestly just does multiply your problems. And it's sort of like the Orthodox Church. You know, it sounds like, great, we'll kick those guys out, but then they just schism each other, and then they have coalitions that are opportunistic and so forth. And we still have Trudeau as a prime minister, right? So it hasn't done. But Tim, so this is interesting. I want to get your thoughts on this, because you are very much an expert in the history of the church and the kingship of Christ. That was a huge theme in your second book. And so a lot of people will bring up, it's funny. We see the Protestant sort of evangelical mega crowd in a very cringe way, making Trump into King David or Constantine. Well, they probably don't like Constantine, but into some sort of figure. He's basically a messiah, and it's weird and wrong. Some of these weird images coming out with like Trump on the cross, things like that. I mean, it's very strange. But there is, and Brian McCall wrote an article for Catholic Family News last election. There is an element of, certain men in history, pagans and otherwise, and in the scriptures, have explicitly been used by God very clearly for the establishment of the true church, or the rebuilding of the temple, and things like that. So maybe you can give us sort of a background of how, it's possible. I mean, I think it's pretty clear that there's a divine hand behind Trump with this. I mean, that seemed like a miracle to me, but it doesn't mean we have to think that he is the Messiah. It doesn't mean we have to think that this makes him good or whatever, but it's just that for some reason, God is using a particular instrument because he seems to be the one sort of restraining the destruction of the civil order. What do you think of that, Tim, if we think about history in that regard?
Yeah, I think it's absolutely legitimate. The tradition of the church has celebrated with immense honors politicians who were less than Catholic, at least in their personal lives. Saint Constantine the Great, equal to the apostles, being the primary example. As you said, he is a saint venerated by Eastern Catholics, not on the Roman calendar, though. But he's not on the Roman martyrology because he was less than Catholic. In his personal life, he murdered his wife and son, as a Roman father could do in those days. Charlemagne is another good example. He was more Catholic, but also succumbed to various pagan moralities. But he was a critical player who was celebrated as an immense figure of Christendom. So God can certainly use these very imperfect figures for great providential acts. Many people have thought about the Tsar of Russia in the past as Tsar Alexander I it was rumored to become Catholic on his deathbed, but people have thought about Russia as a player as well, or the Russian Tsar. I think that it's obvious that, I mean, just with the overthrow of Roe versus Wade, President Trump had a critical role to play in that. I seriously doubt how piously Christian he has ever really been in his life. Maybe he will, hopefully, God willing, now that he's had a brush with death. On the other hand, also with St. Constantine the Great, equal to the apostles, there was this intense messianism represented by Eusebius of Caesarea, who and his tradition perdures, especially in the Eastern Orthodox, where there is a theosis, basically, like this guy is God's anointed king, son of David, sort of thing, and that's what they believed then too. So there is a serious danger of creating Trump into a messiah, even though he could be this sort of catacon figure.
Before we get into the J.D. Vance sort of swing and a miss on the abortion pill, is there anything anyone wants to add on in this vein of, Trump being sort of God's instrument for writing straight with crooked lines? All right. Silence is golden. Okay. So last thing on the docket here. So obviously abortion is no longer a constitutional right. Of course, many states have enacted great laws. I believe LifeSite News has like a tracker, or they did when I was working there, of all the states who effectively made abortion illegal. Some states allowed up to 6 weeks and stuff, but anyone who works in the field of either fighting that or in medical field will know that most abortions probably take place after that, because for one, women don't often know they're pregnant until that time and so forth. So it's an effective ban. The heartbeat bans are effective bans, and in some places, literal bans. So it's been a wonderful thing. But we have seen, sadly, an increase in the use of the pharmaceutical abortion. And there is no, as far as I can tell, there's no restrictions on sending those things across state lines, at least yet. And J.D. Vance was sort of questioning. I'm not going to play the clip because we had glitches with the last one. I don't want to risk that. But many people have seen the clip by now. Basically, he was asked, what would you do with the abortion pill? And he's like, basically, we're not going to touch it, and that's illegal and so forth. What is, yes, that's wrong. That's wrong. But if we were, what is the responsibility of a Catholic candidate in the practical sense in that situation? I mean, is it, we know it's morally wrong to accept it, but is it sort of a proverbial sin against the Holy Ghost to say we're not going to do anything to it? Is it okay to sort of say there's really nothing we could do about it right now, so we're just not going to touch it? Is it more nuanced than that? What would you guys think?
I
would say the main problem with his response. Oh, go ahead. Okay.
Go ahead, Matt, and then you go, Eric.
I was just going to say, because I think I'll probably be in the minority here, and maybe I'm just defending Vance because he's another Cincinnati guy, Catholic convert and all that. But obviously, we want politicians who are completely against abortion with no exceptions whatsoever. But I didn't take what he said. I know Matt was pretty hard on him, and I respect that. But I just feel like he was more saying, maybe a little ineloquently, saying this is the reality, that this isn't going to be banned, and so we're not going to do anything about it. Now, should he have said that? No. But I didn't, like, people were saying we should deny him. He should be denied communion just like a Nancy Pelosi. I saw people saying he's as bad as Biden. I just don't see it like that, because he's been strongly against abortion publicly for his whole political public life. I mean, I heard him speak at the Ohio March for Life last year, and he was very strongly against Amendment 1, which constitutionalized abortion in Ohio, and it passed. He was very strongly against that, worked hard against it. So here's a guy who's definitely been publicly against abortion, says it's wrong. And there's one instance where he does say something that I wouldn't support, but at the same time, I just didn't see it quite as bad as other people did. Maybe I'm just letting my kind of favoritism towards Vance creep in a little bit, but I need to be convinced that he's really become like pro-abortion, like I saw some people call him.
What would you say to that, Matt?
Well, I'll just quote from what he said during the interview. So I tweeted out, I made a clip of this. He was being interviewed by the lady from NBC News, Welker, I think. And she asked him during some of the follow-up question, she says, just to be clear, you support mifepristone being accessible. Mifepristone is an abortifacient drug, and apparently it's opposed in something called the Project, 2025 document, which is being touted as something that's associated with Trump, even though Trump says he's not necessarily for it. So she said during this interview on Meet the Press, I think it was July 7th, if I remember correctly. So Welker says, just to be clear, you support mifepristone being accessible? Question. And Vance said, yes, Kristen, I do. And he did not qualify his support for access to that abortifacient drug at all. That is a problem. As a Catholic, what he needs to say is, I recognize that any form of abortion, whether it's surgical or chemical, is intrinsically evil. I also recognize that I can't necessarily overthrow what the Supreme Court currently says. But he can't give the impression that he doesn't oppose it at all, not even in principle. That's not acceptable.
If I can add, I think that J.D. Vance's support of the abortion pill, or at least his approval of it being allowed from the Supreme Court, that's one thing. But I also think it shows a deeper problem, which is that I firmly believe that J.D. Vance is a part of the problem. I think he is a part of what is called the deep state. He is unquestionably an elite. He was a part of the Silicon Valley industry. He's a sort of follower of Peter Thiel, had everything set up for him by Peter Thiel, who's an extremely bad actor in all of this, in the tech field, whether it be through Clearview AI, with facial recognition, and the military-industrial complex. J.D. Vance is a part of that. I think if you look at the intellectual group that J.D. Vance is a part of, with people like Curtis Yarvin and the whole Thiel-verse, I think this is something that is problematic. And I should clarify that when we talk about J.D. Vance, really, J.D. Vance as vice president isn't that big of a deal. It's the fact that he is being set up as the future for the Republican Party. That's the problem. We need to be able to oppose these things now, oppose these things on principle, so that when the next election comes around, when Trump has a successor, we and our ideas can fill that gap, rather than something like J.D. Vance and the Peter Thiel's network. I think that's bad. I think we need to fill this Trump administration with young guys, middle-aged guys even, who want traditional Catholic values, rather than this thing that Peter Thiel has set up.
Nick, you're smiling. Why are you smiling?
Thanks for the shout out to us middle-aged guys, Marie.
So go on, Nick.
That's what it was. It was just like, let's have young guys, maybe even some middle-aged guys in there. I just thought that was funny. Yeah, I don't know why people are hating on Biden, to be honest, because Pope Francis says he's a good Catholic and Pelosi received communion at the Vatican. So why are we even bothering with that? In all seriousness, so this question you asked, Kennedy, reminded me of a question in one of the moral manuals that I've read, in where this theologian asks the question, what is the obligation of a politician or a political leader to curb vice in his own society? And they particularly give 3 examples. I only remember 2 off the top of my head, but it was an abortionists and drug dealers. Like, should they curb their activity? And they say yes, right? If they weren't to curb this activity, it would be mortally sinful. However, of course, we have to contextualize a lot of this. So I agree with the statement that that J.D. Vance completely messed up when it comes to this issue. Perhaps it comes from a place of ignorance. I think we can try to be charitable and say maybe it's ignorance. I think the more probable is it's political positioning, because the vast majority of Americans do not fall into either A, 100% pro-life, or B, open access no matter what. Most Americans seem to fall into line with some type of limit depending on the trimester. Pragmatically, I think the question therefore becomes, what do we do about it? And this is kind of a question you guys asked in the last segment about, do we start our own political party? I'll give you the answer. No, it's not going to win. It's not going to work, period. It's just not going to happen. Trads are like point something % of the U.S. population. I mean, we don't even have respect in the U.S. College of Bishops, much less the U.S. political world. What we can do, though, is form political PACs and coalitions that can try to have some type of influence inside of government, even if it's not explicitly, hey, this is the Christ the King PAC. Something to that effect, I think, can work. I think that what we'll have to do now when it comes to this set issue, kind of piggyback on Murray. I don't know a ton of information, Murray, to be honest with you, about J.D. Vance aside from the bits that I've read. Some parts I've liked, some parts I've not liked. But I do think that, we need to have some type of serious conversation about what is the future of the, broadly speaking, conservative movement in the United States. Because one thing I can speak to, and I'll finish my thoughts on this, I am very hopeful for the future of conservatism in America, because what I see, I'm sure Murray sees it online too, is that young Gen Z males are extremely conservative, not neocons, not even necessarily kind of like mainstream American conservative, but I'm talking like going back paleoconservatism, if not before that. We're going to have very interesting, robust debates on very interesting political issues in 20, 30 years, 100%, from issues like, as an example, should women vote? Because if women can vote, but not at the same time have to sign up for the Selective Service Act, is that really fair to men? Because if we're in a supposed equal society with feminism, etc., then why is it that my vote as a male can get canceled by a woman who doesn't know very much about, say, civics, but I'm required to go and fight for a military-industrial complex in a foreign war? Good reason not to vote for Kamala Harris and to vote for Trump, right, to avoid wars. But yet she doesn't have to at the same time. Having debates like that, having debates on, we were Gen Z, the millennials as well, were kind of the first generations that were the guinea pigs in the world of internet pornography, because we grew up in an age in which we've never really known the world without the internet. So talking about the health risks and what can transpire from that, I think in the short run, we're going to have some kind of odd situations with candidates like Vance in these areas, right? But in the future, I am very hopeful. And I think that we'll be able to have a more explicit moralism, if you will, being pushed than we do now. So I think at the moment we have to act pragmatically, because I'm pretty unabashed in my support for Trump, but I will say this. Whereas Biden was just demented, he was just a dementia patient, essentially, Kamala Harris is a psychopath who laughs at children who are being bombed in Yemen. Like, she is insane. And if she gets elected, this republic is going to be screwed. From the inflation nonsense that's only going to be ramped up with the dismissal of the Trump tax cuts in 2025. Gen Z, you can kiss any idea of having a family and a future house away if that happens. Also, our men are definitely going to be sent over to fight some type of foreign war, because you really think that Xi Jinping is scared of Kamala Harris, or Putin is scared of Kamala Harris? They're scared of Donald Trump. They're not scared of Kamala Harris. They'd love for Kamala Harris to get in there, Mrs. Cackles herself. So I think that, we have to be principled, but we have to balance that out with pragmatism, in the sense of, we're in a secular republic, and what can we do just to survive? That's kind of my take in the balance, if you will, the balancing act between the being a principled Catholic and at the same time trying to not go and fight and die in a Ukrainian trench.
I'm gonna. We've got about 7 minutes left, so I want to give a little personal anecdote as an outsider, and then I want to give it to Aaron and Tim to. I want to ask about the question of, should Catholics really be single issue voters? Is that really a sustainable thing? Is that something? Because a lot of people kind of tout that, I'm a pro-life voter and anything pro-life I vote for, kind of thing. Is that really the way forward? So during the lockdown, during the COVID, formerly pronounced communism time here in Canada, there is a politician. He's still around. His name is Maxime Bernier, and he has we have like 6 parties, so it's not a third party. It's one of the 6 parties. I voted for them. They're called the People's Party of Canada. Terrible name for outsiders, because it sounds like the CCP. It's the PPC. But what he is really, it's funny. When I started talking about libertarianism publicly, I was talking about it as what I was reading in Canada. Here in Canada, libertarianism is seen as a far-right nationalist movement. And then I started talking about it in American context. They're like, what are you, some pro-abort? And I'm like, what are you talking about? Anyway, so during the lockdown stuff, this notion of anti-lockdown, anti-vaccine mandate, all this kind of stuff really came obviously to the forefront. And he was the only politician, it doesn't get a ton of votes, they get 1 million or something, but you have to get more than that to win major seats. And he was really the only party that was conservative at all, that was really going against this and actually doing things about it and willing to get arrested and kind of the things necessary to stop the silliness. Whereas the Conservative Party of Canada did absolutely nothing. They sucked. They were the worst. They're better now, but they were terrible at the time. They had a true blue neocon, total pansy. His solution to vaccine passports was, well, all the unvaccinated can just spend $250 to take a positive test and wait 5 days before they get on a train. It's like, oh, thanks. That's the Canada I grew up in. And but he does not have he was used to be an MP in the Conservatives and had a mixed voting record on life issues. So I remember talking to some pro-life activists here in Canada. They run an organization. And we were all talking about how great he was, he was awesome. He was the only guy. We were loving the guy. And this was in context with the Canadian election coming up in 2021. And they said, yeah, but it sucks. We can't vote for him. I was like, why? And they said, well, he doesn't have a perfect pro-life voting record. And here's a bunch of candidates in the Conservative Party who have voted pro-life in the past, like the 3 times it's come up. And I thought to myself, none of these politicians are going to end abortion anytime soon. It's not going to happen. Canada's illegal situation for abortion is completely different than the States. It's not happening in my lifetime unless there's an act of God. And he's the only one, his candidates were the only ones that actually took a stand against something that you could do something against right now, which was very, very grave and very destructive to the society. And I kind of saw the limitations of this single issue voting thing where it was kind of almost living in this fantasy land where as long as he's pro-life, he's good. But they were still basically supporting the communism. They just happened to be personally pro-life. So maybe Aaron, again, with your background in moral theology from reading all these catechisms, is this single issue voter thing really a Catholic position, or is it more sort of a modern talking point?
It's pretty absent from the catechetical tradition, so it's something a little more contemporary that we have to grapple with. The biggest, of course, set of principles that apply are always double effect, and that's more or less where we've been in the States probably since the Kennedy era, if not prior to that, is looking at every one of these potential candidates, not just at the federal level, but often at the states level. No one of them comes with a clean nose. And nobody can go into and out of the voting booth with complete confidence that the person they're nominating for office is going to uphold the revealed system of morals and doctrine that God has communicated to us and is retained. Well, it's a matter of not directly supporting evils, but holding out hope that your putting forward of a certain candidate may reduce, may restrict, limit evils in these other sectors. So it's really it's peculiar. I mean, where we are now, and when you add to this I think increasingly reasonable suspicion that Americans have about their vote even meaning anything in the democratic process. Presently. So I don't, you can on the one hand say that we have this system of principles, there isn't a single issue. If there was a one issue, right, it would be right worship. I mean, that's something we find in all of the catechisms formally, is that there can be no support for false worship. Well, that's seldom something declared on a party platform, but we can assume that that's the case with every candidate, right, that we're putting forward, again, for the last half century or better. So after that, we are in this realm of looking at restricting evil and potentially trying to support a lesser of two. But we're also in a place, I think, now that it's reasonable to question. We don't have to go to the extreme of saying that we have to support a lesser of two, but we're also in a place, I think, now that it's reasonable to question whether or not we don't have a Catholic elite. I think we could do a lot to work for that. It'd be great to have a Catholic elite that we can look at for moving into office, or better yet, convert those that are positioned for office. We don't see that tactic anymore. Formerly, where bishops would send, their greatest preachers, their greatest evangelists, and seek to have these interactions with folks that are already in the ranks of the elite, and say, look, we care about your eternal soul. We want you to convert. We want to show you the way forward so that you may also then lead this nation. We could do a little more focused effort on that. I'd like to see a big UCCB event in action. We're all obligated to act locally first. We all have spheres of influence that at least extend to the bounds of our home site, our households. But for many of us, that's going to be even broader than that. What can we do locally in the community, really establishing parallel social structures of every kind? Because I foresee a time when we'll have a technocratic lockout of some character, and it'll be just no off-ramp. There'll be no alternatives for us to do a lot more to focus.
That's great, Aaron. Thanks for that. Tim, last, I'll kick it over to you. Maybe just add to that, is it okay? Is it good for Catholics to have enthusiasm about Trump? Is it more of just, we're just dragging our heels and okay, I guess I'll vote for him because he's lesser of two evils? Or is there still room for, heck yeah, I'm going to put my MAGA hat on and I'm going to fight like hell because I don't want to get shot by communists? That would be I want people to know, I wish I could vote for Donald Trump. I'm at the point now where people say, like, obviously I talk about liberalism, I think it's evil, but my view is the barbarians are trying to kill my children and destroy my village. I'm not going to ask my neighbor what he believes about the Nicene Creed before he grabs his axe and runs at the horde with me. I'm just concerned with the horde at the moment. So what do you think, Tim? Nice hat, Eric, by the way.
Eric, are you going to rip your shirt off like Hulk Hogan at the convention?
I have very mixed feelings about Trump. I think Trump is he's a very bad thing in many ways, but at the same time, he's a very good thing in many ways. And I mean, those good things are very good. They're very, very good, those good things. So I think it's totally legitimate to have enthusiasm. But I think one of the things that you pointed out to me, Kennedy, when you started becoming this libertarian, which was very shocking to me at first, the most convincing argument you made to me was that you said, we are now in an unprecedented technocratic totalitarian state situation. And the only solution then is to be super duper libertarian small state. That's what you need to support because that's the most important thing. And in the United States, as elsewhere, I mean, and Aaron just pointed out, if there is a one single vote, or one single issue, it is the first commandment. And we saw the first commandment and the third commandment, for that matter, suppressed in these United States in the blink of an eye, where the masses were suppressed because of a technocratic totalitarian state said they should do it. And the experts said that, and we all know the science is right. So that was a very compelling argument by Kennedy to me, and that one could very legitimately vote for a libertarian candidate who wants to basically fire the entire bureaucracy in Ottawa and the entire bureaucracy in DC or whatever, and make it just this little tiny, whatever, minimalist subsidiarity model, even though he's got the woke mind virus and he doesn't understand abortion and he missed that vote and he messed that up. But if he wants to dismantle the beast so that we can have right worship and we can keep the sacraments, I think that would be a legitimate position to take.
All right. Well, Eric, thanks for putting your hat on. That's the cherry on top of the whole stream. And ladies and gentlemen, I'm having issues with my. Oh, that's good. There you go. What is that? Catholic candidate or something? Or what is going on there?
Yeah, this is my my ticket for 2024.
I'm having some lag issues on my end with bringing up links and stuff. So we usually do the same Joseph prayer to end, but I can't bring it up right now. But we'll just end by saying, ladies and gentlemen, pray for your civil leaders. I was just reading in the Divine Intimacy this morning from my morning meditation. The real obligation to pray for your neighbors and extends to the worst of them. And that's the worse they are, the harder we should pray. And Christ tells us to pray for our enemies. That includes even Kamala Harris, because hell is real and she has a soul. And we do not want her to go there. We don't want anyone to go there. And then also pray for the strength of your leaders, because great leaders can be terrible men can be great leaders, and Donald Trump seems to have a potential of doing some good things for Catholics and for the nation as a whole, even though he's got a checkered past. And pray that Hulk Hogan is the next nominee for president in the next election, because I might even move to the States and get my citizenship just to vote for him. All right, last thing. Check out this 1 Peter 5 fundraiser. The link is in the description area of this podcast. And that's all, gentlemen. Anything anyone wants to say before we sign off here?
Jesus is
sure.
king.
I'll say, make America great again. Let's do it, boys.
And then he rips off his shirt and the crowd goes wild. All right, ladies and gentlemen, this has been a pleasure. We'll see you next month. This has been another edition of the Trad Roundtable on Mere Tradition, formerly called the Kennedy Report. And we will all see you next time. God bless you all. Bye, guys.